Hi, I'm Hershey Felder on the stage of the Royal George Theatre, and you're watching Taped with Rabbi Doug.
We're gonna see Rabbi Doug. We're gonna see Rabbi Doug. We're gonna see Rabbi Doug on your TV tonight.
But Daddy, I want to watch Monday Night Football.
Forget about Monday Night Football. There's no other thing we're gonna watch on Monday but Rabbi Doug. Yeah, Rabbi Doug on TV tonight. We're gonna see Rabbi Doug. Oh, everybody talk about Doug.
Shalom and welcome to Taped with Rabbi Doug. Glad you could be with us today. My guest today is author and very nice person, Abigail Pogrebin. And Abigail Pogrebin is someone who knows a lot of famous people. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
And I'm so glad you could be with us today. You're in Chicago doing book signings and promoting your latest book, which is your first published book called Stars of David. And this book is an amazing book because you have discussed and interviewed people about their Judaism, and not just one or two or three. How many people actually did you talk to?
62.
62 different people. So many famous people. The first question I have to ask you, and I know our viewers are going to wonder, is how does someone get to the inside of 62 people to ask them about their Judaism and actually get an interview scheduled with them? What's your background in journalism and your methods of meeting all these people?
I started in broadcast journalism. I produced for Fred Friendly and Charlie Rose and Bill Moyers, and my longest tenure was at 60 Minutes. I produced for Ed Bradley and Mike Wallace, and I learned definitely from them how to ask questions and also how to persevere when you want to get someone on camera. In this case, when you want to sit down with someone for an interview. And basically what I wrote a letter that I thought was hopefully fairly convincing about what I was doing. And as I started building a list of famous people, the first 5 people I interviewed were probably Leonard Nimoy, Sarah Jessica Parker, Stephen Sondheim, Jason Alexander, and I can't remember Mike Wallace. Mm-hmm. And in that list was a pretty substantial list to go to others and say, look who has already said yes. Will you also be a part of this book? And I was basically asking them to talk about a very personal area, which is how they feel about being Jewish.
So when you started this, you weren't just talking about doing an article. You really planned on writing a book with all these interviews.
I did set out to write a book, and to sell the book, I did these first 5 interviews, and wrote them up for a proposal, and it was that proposal that sold the book.
Who do you think the toughest people to convince to be included in your book?
Well, I think the longest wooing that went on was for Steven Spielberg. Uh-huh. He never said no, but he never said yes. And I was into my 2nd year, and I was getting to the deadline when I had to be done. And I just wrote him, and I sort of said, I'm on my knees. I feel like this book will not be complete without you. And here's who else is in it. And by that point, the list was formidable, I think. Will you please be a part of it? I'll go anywhere, anytime. And his the person who handles his stuff, he wrote me an email and said, "You've got it. Get on a plane."
Did you ever walk into the Milky Way kosher restaurant in Los Angeles and talk to his mother and ask her if she'd get home before you?
No, I was thinking about doing that. In fact, he talks about the Milky Way and how that's where he used to feel the most Jewish until he married Kate Capshaw and she converted, and that's when he kind of came back.
Very nice, very nice. Tell me, did you have a general 1 or 2 questions that you asked everyone? I'm sure you set specific questions for each person you met, but what was the general questions that you asked everyone?
Right, that's a very good question, and I did. I had 4 or 5 pages of questions that I would start with for every single person, and I would quickly veer into whichever direction I thought was going to be the most interesting. But some of the basic questions, I always started with childhood. I wanted to know about which holidays they celebrated. Where do they have their seders? What foods do they remember? What do they like? What didn't they like? Did they grow up fasting? Did their parents fast? Did they celebrate Hanukkah? Did they celebrate Christmas, which a lot of them had, or some of them do now? I really sort of tried to get a sense of their Jewish childhood. And then we usually got into kind of, the college years and then marriage, which was usually a very rich area. Child rearing, if they had kids, had they raised them with Judaism? And then the professional life, that was sort of the last umbrella. Were they publicly Jews? Do they find that it helped or hurt to be Jewish in whichever field they're in? And then I would finally ask about politics, Israel. particularly, and how they felt about the country and the politics there.
Very interesting. Reading through some of the people in the book who you interviewed, I noticed some people gave you very dramatic and deep answers to things, and some people were very short in their answers. Did any of them who gave you short answers really not want to be there, or ask you afterwards to remove them from the book?
They didn't ask to remove them, but I sense in a way that some people would say yes, and then once you were actually in the room and interviewing them, they they had second thoughts about how honest they wanted to be. I think that this was more personal territory than people realized in a way until we started the conversation. And so that often brought them up short. Some people really were expansive and kind of warmed to the subject, and some became a little reticent.
Now we're going to see some excerpts from your speech at the bookstore doing the signing at the Borders that you did the signing at. But my question is this, these people come to you, and some of them are very proud of their Judaism. Some of them don't really feel very Jewish in their lives now. Did you find some people embarrassed to say, I'm not really as Jewish as I should be, or what? Was there an embarrassment by some people, and did that make them embarrassed to be part of this book, do you think?
I don't think they were embarrassed to be part of the book, but I think some were hesitant about how Jewish they are, and there's some defensiveness about whether they should or shouldn't be more observant. I would often ask, for those who had left ritual behind, who were not very observant, I would say, what does it mean to them to be Jewish without Judaism? And that question sometimes got people's back up. They immediately would be, not all, but many of them were, I'm Jewish the way I am. My Jewishness is enough, it's adequate, it's strong, and I don't have to kind of subscribe to any category of synagogue or ritual to be a Jew.
More of a cultural or secular Jew,
maybe
one would say.
William Shatner told me, I'm Jewish, but without the protocols. So one question I found myself asking people again and again is, what does it mean to be Jewish without Judaism? Ruth Reichel's answer, it's the fact that the world won't let us forget. You can say till the cows come home that you're not a Jew, but the world keeps telling you that you are, and that's what makes you a Jew. Max Frankel, former editor of the New York Times, said, what makes us anything? What makes us American? I don't go around saluting the flag or wearing a flag. It's a set of beliefs, emotional attachments, and comforts. Aaron Brown said, what matters to me is not whether we light a candle on Friday night, because the biggest hypocrite on the planet can light a candle. I'm more interested in how they live their lives the other 6 days a week and how they treat people. But Leon Wieseltier, again at the New Republic, who also wrote a book called Kaddish, he said that Jews are not Jews without ritual, without Torah. That it's fine if you reject Judaism after taking the time to actually learn it, but that more typically, American Jews embrace their Jewishness lazily, without making the effort to understand what it's really about. Quote, American Jews, like Americans, he said, have a very consumerist attitude toward their identity. They pick and choose the bits of this and that they like. I think the great historical failing of American Jewry is not its rate of intermarriage, but its rate of illiteracy. I pointed out to him that for many of the people I interviewed, observance takes a lot of time out of already very busy, very demanding lives. He scoffed at me. Oh, please, he said. We're talking about people who can make $1 million in a morning, learn a backhand in a month, learn a foreign language in a summer, and build a summer house in a winter. We're talking about intelligent, energetic individuals who master many things when they wish to. This conversation, I have to admit, is what kind of turned my own sense of identity around. I did not grow up with a formal Jewish education. My mother was raised with one, but she didn't give it to us because when she was 15 years old, she had sort of a seminal experience where she was excluded from the mourner's prayer, the mourner's minyan, after her mother's death because she was female. And it was such a shattering kind of moment for her that she was excluded at such a key time in her upbringing that when we were kids, she didn't give us a formal education. I was not bar mitzvah. And there was something about, I think, listening to all of these people talk about their disaffection or disconnection. Not all of them felt it, but many of them did. And then having Wieseltier basically throw down the gauntlet and said, there's no excuse for not at least dipping a toe into your text, into figuring out what this heritage is that is yours. And so I started to study Torah with a wonderful young rabbi and friend of mine. And, it really did sort of open my eyes. I hate to sound kind of Oprah about it, but it did send me on a journey of a certain kind. And I ended up becoming bat mitzvah last May, just 3 days before I turned 40. It was a moment that I hadn't expected when I started this book, and it still surprises me looking back on it. I mean, I never expected that sitting down with famous people would lead me to Bima, or lead me to want to incorporate more of the tradition in my life. And I don't want to misrepresent it, because I am not a religious person now. I don't think that would be fair to say. But the process of doing this book did send me on a kind of on a path that I hope it will send some of you. And I don't just mean spiritually, but just in terms of thinking about what matters and what you want to pass on, and what we've inherited for those of us who have. I hope you'll dip into Stars of David, those of you who haven't yet, and that it will surprise you and entertain you, and maybe make you think a little bit too. Thanks so much.
I'm Peter Yarrow of Peter, Paul, and Mary, sometimes known as Puff the Magic Dragon, and I'm hiding the great face of Rabbi Doug. Watch him. Rabbi Doug. It's a wonderful show.
Let's go back to the beginning a bit. I know that you talk about it at the beginning of your book, about your own interests in Judaism and your own experiences, and people should really get Stars of David and take a look at it by Abigail Pogrebin, and it's so interesting. How did you yourself say, my Judaism makes me want to find out about others and tell about others? What was your whole influence and your whole thoughts, what were all your thoughts that made you want to go out and do this and write this book?
I think I was, even though I was raised feeling very Jewish, I had my own misgivings about how Jewish I really was. I had some sense of intimidation about how much I knew, how grounded I was in text, in tradition. And I was not given a formal Jewish education. We celebrated all the major holidays. But my mother, who was raised with a lot of religion, sort of had a seminal moment when she was 15 years old. Her mother died. She was excluded from the minyan, the mourner's minyan, because she was female. And that was such a watershed moment for her that she really left the tradition behind for a number of years. And it was during that period when I was a kid and I didn't get, the Hebrew school and the synagogue or the bat mitzvah. And then when I got to college, I did take Hebrew. I took Jewish literature. I was clearly kind of flailing a little bit to try to make up for lost time and not doing it very successfully. And when I started doing this book, I think hearing all of these people talk about their own struggles with identity made me realize I hadn't asked myself many of the questions I was asking them. And so I started to study Torah with a young rabbi named Jennifer Krause in New York City. And she, it was a very kind of casual, once a week, discussing the portion of the week. And it was eye-opening to me. I mean, I don't want it to sound too kind of eureka, but it really was much more invigorating intellectually and kind of emotionally than I expected.
Now, this is before the book or after the book?
This is kind of concurrent with the book. So while I'm studying Torah and doing these interviews, something happened to me, and I was surprised by it. I don't want to misrepresent it. It's not like I'm now a shul-going Jew on a weekly basis. But I'm very interested, much more engaged in the tradition.
A more involved Jew.
I am a more involved Jew.
That's
and I decided to become bat mitzvah last May, 3 days before I turned 40. I figured it was time. And that was a really wonderful, a really meaningful day for me.
You don't look 40.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
But, so that's a wonderful thing, because that's really what Judaism is all about, something that would inspire you to make your Judaism more part of your life.
Yeah, to sort of find your way.
You found that in your own research.
Yes, it was sort of a strange way of getting there, but...
Do you think that your writing a book about Judaism and Jews has brought you into more of a focus that you want to write something else about Jews, or maybe something about people who didn't want to be in the book, or something like that?
Well, I am sort of hoping in a way to get... Yeah, I want to carry this with me, but I don't want to I don't know that I'm going to be a Jewish writer. I think that's a decision that someone makes, and I haven't really quite made that decision, and not because I wouldn't be proud of it. I just don't feel like I've earned that quite yet. And I still feel like I'm wearing the journalist's hat more than the hat of the Jewish interlocutor, if that makes sense. So I'm not sure the next subject will be my next book. God willing, that there will be one, will be in that subject matter. But this whole experience, and also going around the country and talking about the book and talking to many Jewish groups and JCCs and synagogues, has been its own kind of remarkable experience.
Well, you're meeting a lot of prominent Jewish people in different cities, obviously, as well.
Yeah. Any questions about process or people or traffic? Anything? Yes.
When you found that these certain people would not sit down and discuss with you, perhaps next time you just say to them, well, that's a separate chapter, those that refuse to be.
Yeah, no, it's funny. Did all of you hear that? That he's asking about maybe the next time making a chapter of those who refuse to be in the book. I can't describe their. I don't know what their reasons were for saying no, but I did at one point consider listing them, just because I thought that it was I had asked them publicly and they had said no publicly. But I didn't want this to be. This is not at all a belligerent book, and I'm not. I set out to make a statement, and so I feel like their decisions are their own. Right. They might. Sorry. Ace Greenberg was really tough. For those of you who haven't seen his chapter, he was kind of monosyllabic. Everyone else talked, very expansively, and he had sort of a military approach. And when I interviewed him, he sat looking straight ahead. I was to his left, and he just looked straight ahead. He never turned to me during the whole interview, which made me obviously a little bit nervous. And I also was going through my questions like wildfire. So where usually I would ask a question and someone would talk for a good, 15 minutes if it was sort of a juicy enough question, I just was suddenly saying I need more material, because, I would say to him, how important is being Jewish to you? He'd be very, and was it difficult at all, being a Jew and trying to get into investment banking? It was hard, but I did it, And what I love about his chapter is that I think that, and the reason why I did include it, despite the fact that many of these answers are 4 words, is that I think that he is another type. I love that it's a very diverse group. And he is very unapologetic about even the anti-Semitic moments in his life. He is a very strong and very successful personality. And in his own way, I found him kind of Hamish, the word. But he also was very no-nonsense. And he wasn't going to be touchy-feely, and he wasn't going to kind of go into the sort of spiritual realm. And I appreciated that. Yes? In terms of Google rights, no. You mean like reprinting? Yeah, no, I taped every interview, and I did that, not just for my own sense of security, but also I wanted to be clear that they were going to be on the record in a way that was, audio taped, and it would be harder to, first of all, argue with the accuracy. And then we did send them all releases. And when I asked everyone, there's a photo of everyone in the book for those of you who haven't seen it, and I asked everyone to send the photo that they selected. And when I did that, I often hadn't talked to them in a long time, so it was another chance for them to kind of realize this book is happening and it's going to be out there and you're going to be in it. If anything is reproduced in a magazine or a newspaper, then we need their permission. There was only a couple people. There were only a couple people who asked to see their interview before it ran. Most people did not, and that was very nerve-wracking for me, as you can imagine, because once you see your own words, you either want to change them or pull them back. Kenneth Cole was one of the very few. I can count them on one hand who asked to read their transcript, and he is very honest. For those of you who haven't seen his chapter about his struggle with having chosen to raise his children Catholic. And he did hesitate to keep that in the book, and at one point asked me to take it out, and then he changed his mind, which relieved me quite a bit. And I think to his credit, said I said it, and I want to stick with it. Yes. Yeah, she's asking. She's saying that Mike Wallace is a good question. Mike Wallace has been known as an anti-Semitic Jew for many years. And that was mainly because of his coverage of the Arab questions. And he, when he was at 60 Minutes, he did a number of pieces that really outraged the Jewish community. One of them particularly was on Syria. I was not there at the time. It was in the the 70s, where he basically said that Jews were actually better treated in Syria than had been expected, or it was known, and the Jewish communities were up in arms. And he, I sat down with him, and I had worked for him, and he's a very non-religious Jew, and he would be in giving me a lot of grief for not being in the office on Yom Kippur when he was sitting at his desk. But he says the Shema, he recites the Shema every night before he goes to bed, and that startled me. For those of you who don't know, it's one of the most hallowed prayers you can say. And he was clearly wounded by those accusations in the 70s and 80s. I think they stayed with him. I wouldn't say that he flagged in any way on his doggedness or his sense of fairness. I mean, some of you may think he wasn't fair, or he was too fair. But I think that it did sting him. He did take it personally and felt that it was unjust. And at this point, he feels very identified as a Jew, even though he does nothing about it in terms of ritual. Yes.
Do you have any special adventures gaining
the adventures in every interview was a little bit of a slog, just in terms of getting through the handlers. All of these people have these, they're just hired people to say no. And I don't think I could have done this book without email, because I found that email, you could write just the letter you wanted them to read, and that person, whoever works for them, has to give it to them, pretty much. Although, I will say that Donna, I'll admit it because I thought it was so outrageous. Donna Karan's assistant said, "I'm not even going to show her this letter, I know she'll never do it." And I thought that was really, I don't think she was doing her job well. I thought that at least, whether Donna Karan wants to say no or yes to me, she should have been able to make that decision herself. But most of the people I know, even just from being at 60 Minutes and seeing when someone's trying to get to Ed Bradley or Mike, they read their mail. They do. And so if I was calling, I would get an unbelievably cold and officious response. And so I stopped calling, and I would just try to get an email, come hell or high water. And the only thing I'd say is that, Steven Spielberg was the last interview, and it came through at the very last minute. And I, was on my knees at that point. I said, I don't have Barbra Streisand. I feel like if I don't have Spielberg, people are going to say this is not, you didn't get the job done. And at the last minute, they said, okay, come. And not until I was in his office did I actually believe it. Yes?
When people were responding to your questions, did you get any feeling that they really hadn't thought about those questions before, and that they were kind of surprised by their
Yeah, I think it's a very good question. Did people hear it? That people were surprised? Yeah, I found that, I think in a way, I didn't need to trick people going into this, but I think my introduction letter about what I was doing, they thought, this will be substantive, this will be interesting, but they didn't really anticipate how personal it gets, and how fast it gets personal. And I was surprised too. Right away you're into marriage, you're into children, you're into God, you're into, you're not just into what was your bar mitzvah like. And frankly, if the interviews had been tell me about your Seder, I don't think I would have had a book, and I would have had to abandon it. I worried about that in the beginning, that people would be kind of like a little bit of this rah-rah, we're Jewish, and even though I think there's a place for that, an important place for those books, I wanted this to be a little more honest, and a little more kind of, where are these famous Jews really? No matter, how kind of un-PC their answers may be. And there were a few moments where people I think who are used to kind of just, they really had to find their words. And one of them, I don't want to dwell on Mike Wallace, but I asked him about whether he's ever thought about the fact that the Wallach line, they were Wallachs, has ended with him, because his son, Chris Wallace, who is also on I think he's on Fox News now, married a Catholic woman and raising their kids. They're raising their kids Catholic. And I said to Mike, does it ever give you pause to think that there are no more Jews kind of in your line? And he was silent. I mean, he just really had not thought about it. And there were moments like that, even tiny moments where someone would talk about their children or had a first marriage. Dustin Hoffman first married, as he said, the ideal chicks, and then he ended up with a Jew. They were just very, very true, very honest moments, and thank God for them, because I did worry very much that everyone would have their stock answers. Yes.
Let's take that question just a little bit further. I'm just wondering, You mentioned tonight and also in the epilogue that you got in touch with your Judaism through writing of the book, and the readers, needless to say, have also gotten in touch with their Judaism, especially religious Judaism, through reading the book. Did you ever sense with those you interviewed that through interviewing them, either during the interview or even subsequently at all, just having the opportunity to talk about it, that they might have also gotten in touch with something that they hadn't really considered?
First of all, I want to thank you for reading the epilogue. I feel like someone told me this is a good bathroom book, which I try to take as a compliment if you can pick it up and put it down. But it's nice when someone actually gets to the epilogue. I'm very curious. I wish I could go back in a way and say, I mean, each one of these interviews, when I left, I felt like we'd been through something together. But I think I also had this fantasy that we were going to be friends, and that didn't happen. You know, I keep waiting for Dustin's call. But I did feel like even if they weren't going to talk about it publicly or that much again, that we had kind of started somewhere and ended somewhere else. And I have gotten a few emails, I will say, that I will treasure to this day, I mean forever, that where many of them actually felt humbled to see that they were in the company of these others and also to read kind of their cohorts. And I was very satisfying, a sense that everyone's sort of struggling with the same stuff. And that here they all sort of move in these echelons, and they don't kind of look to their right and left and say, this is sort of a fellow Jew, and we're in the same camp, kind of. We have the same struggles. Is that it? Thank you all. Thank you so much for coming out of the mix.
Nobody likes me. Nobody. Maybe it's because I like to attack people. Men, women, kids. I can reduce them to weak, stammering, confused, scared imitations of their former selves. If they don't stop me, I just might leave them that way for life. I am a stroke.
Learn to recognize a stroke and act quickly. Time lost is brain lost.
Hi, I'm Robbie Benson. You're watching Tape with Rabbi Doug.
Tell me the Pogrebin background. Where are you from? Where's your family? Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in New York City, and I still live there, and I have 2 young children myself. I'm married to a man who is from Skokie. He grew up in Skokie and Evanston.
Very nice, very nice. So that's your Chicago connection.
That's my Chicago connection. I've got my roots now.
Very nice, very nice. Well, we want to welcome you to town.
Thank you.
And just thank you so much for being on the show.
It was great to talk to you.
This is a wonderful book. It's called Stars of David by Abigail Pogrebin. And Abigail Pogrebin is a wonderful writer and a wonderful person.
Thank you.
I just wish you much success with your book and in your career, wherever you go with journalism, whether it's back to TV, magazines, writing another book that you'll publish. I just wish you much success with everything. I want to thank Abigail. I want to thank all of you for being with us here on Taped with Rabbi Doug. Remember, we're on every week at this time, so hope to see you next time right here on Taped with Rabbi Doug. Shalom.
Yeah, I'm talking about Rabbi Doug. Talking about Rabbi Doug. Talking about Rabbi Doug on your TV show. Well, he's the rabbi for me. Anytime you need. You're gonna get married or you're gonna die. Gonna see Rabbi Doug. Gonna see Rabbi Doug. Gonna see Rabbi Doug. Gonna see Rabbi Doug on the TV tonight.